I'm going to do a short presentation looking at why agriculture and coffee matters to developing countries, the World Bank's work in the agricultural sector, the World Bank's lending cycle, so that people who are in the audience who think that they may want to engage the World Bank in financing a project for the coffee sector can understand how does the World Bank work with national governments to provide financing. And then I'd like to briefly mention something that Mauricio was going to address, which is a document that we've been working on and just recently published with the ICO. The document's outside for anyone who wishes to take a copy, looking at both risk and finance in the global coffee sector. So in terms of why agriculture matters, we have to understand that if we read the World Development Report and we look at the data we have, 75% of the world's poor, or people living in poverty, are involved in farming. They are coffee growers, they are cotton growers, they are people working in agricultural value chains in developing countries. If we want to achieve what the World Bank is setting out to achieve, which is a reduction in extreme poverty and an increase in shared prosperity, we cannot do that without focusing on improving agriculture. As such, the department or the practice that I work for, the Agricultural Global Practice in Washington, is setting its focus clearly on the area of how do we improve agricultural productivity and yields so as to reduce poverty in agricultural areas and globally. We will not achieve the Millennium Development Goals without increases in agricultural productivity, especially in Africa. Basically, if we want to see economic growth, we have to see agriculture as key to that. We have to understand that affordable food and wage competitiveness comes from that, and that developing countries with a large agricultural sector actually have a comparative advantage in trade. As such, if we exclude and don't focus on agriculture as a driver of development, we will fail to achieve those Millennium Development Goals related to poverty. This pie chart just summarizes that very clearly and shows that if we look at the global population of poor people in the world, people living in poverty, 75% of those work in agriculture, are rural populations. So if we don't focus on agricultural sectors such as coffee, which employs, I believe, 22 million people in rural areas, we will fail to achieve those developmental goals. One of the interesting things that we often overlook when we talk about this is that growth from agriculture directly reduces poverty. It's a very, very clear metric if you have a look at this table here, where we see that basically expenditure in agriculture achieves the greatest kind of impact. Also, agriculture is critical to improving and dealing with climate change. We will not have environmental sustainability if we don't understand that agriculture is part of the problem and as such a critical part of the solution. 21% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the agricultural sectors in developing countries and from deforestation. As such, the world has to take note of agriculture if it actually wants to tackle climate change effectively. We can't just look at urban sectors, we can't just look at industrialized economies, we have to look at developing countries and agricultural sectors. This is where agriculture can play a role in improving and being part of the solution. We can have a triple win, namely we can improve productivity and food security for people, and at the same time enhance farmers and smallholders' resilience to drought, flood, erosion, heat and water stress, all critical issues that are facing coffee communities across the world. And we can do it in a carbon neutral or low carbon impact manner. All of these are achievable, but they take resources, they take focus and they take effort. Also, as everyone in this room knows from their work in the coffee sector, there are significant opportunities for agricultural sectors. As incomes grow in developing countries, there are increasing markets for goods to be sold into. As such, tailoring agricultural products to those growing markets gives great opportunities. Also, there is significant benefits that can come from utilizing technology effectively. Using improved seeds, for example, has had an amazing impact in both rice and cotton. And when we look at the Colombian example that we detail in the report, the opportunities for dealing with coffee rust disease that comes from using proper tree cultivars that are rust resistant mean that even coffee sector communities can find trees that can actually deal with some of the outcomes of growing climate change issues. Also, we have a strong belief in the World Bank of focusing on risk management, understanding what are the risks facing the agricultural sectors and how can those be best mitigated. This is also critical from a financing perspective. If we expect private sector banks to lend to the coffee sector, they have to know that the coffee sector and the actors within the coffee sector are effectively managing their risks. You can't lend to someone who isn't managing their business well, and as such we have to help farmers, we have to help traders, and we have to find means to actually help them improve the management of their enterprises. And that will definitely, in the coffee world, if we think about smallholders, have a critical part in working to build producer organizations and their capacity. And to that point, there are a few cases within this document that's being handed out now that actually look at how can you build the capacity of aggregated producer entities and cooperatives to be more credible borrowers to access finance. However, we shouldn't downplay how difficult the challenge is in the global agricultural sector. We need to improve productivity to continue feeding people, as well as growing crops such as coffee that generate good incomes for communities. If we think about some of the challenges that all agricultural sectors face, we have issues in terms of land being stationary in terms of the opportunity to expand production, and also the challenge of water scarcity. It's very rare that you meet any agriculturalists who tell you that they haven't got a problem with drought. If we look at the recent impact of drought on the US agricultural sectors, it's pretty clear that everyone is exposed to increasing scarcity of water and increasing volatility. Another big challenge for all of us, including the people in this room, is that we underspend money, governments as well as the global community, on research and development. If we think about, and this chart shows it quite clearly, the importance of agriculture to certain countries, where agricultural GDP is a large part of overall GDP, spending on agricultural research and development is generally lower than it should be. What you realize is the countries that do have smaller agricultural sectors as a share of their economy actually spend a greater share of their agricultural R&D. What that means is that developing countries with large coffee sector communities must start to consider how can they utilize their research and development and how can they improve that expenditure. There's also a misinvestment that we would argue is occurring, where there are subsidies given to agricultural sectors, but while public investment is falling. Public investment has the greatest opportunity to help farmers improve their yields, improve their productivity, and improve their resilience to climatic events. As such, we need to focus how we spend our money more effectively. Another challenge is that donor support to agriculture is falling as a share of total donor contributions. If we think about where poverty lies and the amount of share that goes to, or development assistance that goes to agriculture, we can see that the two are not strongly correlated. As such, if we see that only 4% of official development assistance and only 4% of public spending go to agriculture, we can also see that 75% of poor people are located in agricultural areas. We can see a mismatch between where both the global development community and national governments are pushing their resources, and yet poor people are primarily located in agricultural and rural areas. We need to see an improved correlation or directional targeting of resources if we want to see poverty reduce. And of course, and this slide is critical, short-term volatility is no longer just the occasional shock, the occasional one-off event. We're seeing these events come more frequently and have more impact. And as such, we have to start thinking of agricultural production in terms of how do we actually take account of these events and actually build resilience of farmers and agricultural communities to cope with them. As such, we at the World Bank believe that we need to accelerate smallholder productivity increases for agricultural growth and food security. We have to enhance sustainable production and environmental services from agriculture. We have to consider how agriculture is produced and undertaken and consider the kind of carbon capture technologies available. And we can't think just about farmers producing crops. We have to think about non-farm incomes to supplement those incomes. And we have to also think about the quality of governance in agriculture, both at the local, national, and global levels. At the World Bank, agricultural financing has increased significantly in the past 3 years to $6 billion. 70% of that money goes to increasing productivity, with half going to South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. This is directly related to achieving those two targets of the World Bank of reduction in extreme poverty and increases in shared prosperity. I've already mentioned water stress, but one of the key challenges is how can we continue growing productivity in a world of increasing shortages of water? Land administration, where we have to understand that for farmers to borrow, they also need to have collateral, and we need to understand how land can be owned by those users and used to actually facilitate access to finance. One of our focuses of the team I work for is on increasing agricultural finance to smallholder farmers and agri-businesses. There is an incredible amount of work that still needs to be done on providing basic financial services and improving financial inclusion to rural communities, not just farmers, but also to other actors within the rural environment. And there's increasing amounts of work being done to ensure that financial services and loans are being provided in that area. It's not easy and requires a significant amount of work using both new technologies, but also building the capacity of financiers on the ground to expand their lending to those sectors. We have to also think about how we can build agro enterprises to actually take those agricultural products and add value at every stage of the value chain. And of course, thinking about non-farm enterprise to add additional income opportunities. A focus on infrastructure in rural areas to enable access to markets is also critical if farmers are to improve their livelihoods and raise their value of their products. At the World Bank, we've embraced the importance of agricultural risk management. There are so many issues facing markets in terms of market risks. There are many issues facing the enabling environment risks, and there is an incredible amount of productivity risk. However, so many of those risks, if considered in advance of their occurring, can be mitigated so that the actors, when those risks arrive, are protected from their full impact. And I think additional investment in the risk management sector can yield incredible results. We also understand how important promoting food and agricultural standards are, and the World Bank continues to support initiatives to that effect. As many of you know from our presentation last time, the World Bank doesn't just lend to governments, but also has the IFC working on private sector financing. There's a lot of information on our websites for further, if you want to get more information, and it gives the opportunity on private sector companies in developing countries who may have needs for investments and financing to approach the IFC to see what services are available. I've put up some details here about the World Bank Agricultural Action Plan that drives our practices work. And again, the 5 critical areas are improving agricultural productivity so that farmers on a set space can produce more crops, reducing risk and vulnerability of those farming communities, improving links for farmers to markets so that they can strengthen those value chains and get greater value through them, improving rural non-farm incomes, and enhancing environmental services and sustainability. Again, to drive the point home, if 75% of the world's poor are rural and most are involved in farming, if we want to tackle poverty, we have to do it by considering the rural agricultural sector. Now, one of the goals of this presentation, and please let me know if I'm running out of time, is to consider how do countries that want to borrow from the World Bank to invest in agriculture approach the World Bank, and what is the project lending cycle. To that effect, up here we have the World Bank's project cycle, where a country and the World Bank work together to create a project, provide the financing for that project, and to implement that project. There are 6 steps, starting with identification, assessment, appraisal, negotiations and board approval, drawdown of the loan, then the implementation of the project and support from the bank to the client, and completion and evaluation at the end. All the projects that the World Bank gets involved in financing have to link to the country partnership framework. This is where the World Bank and the government of each individual nation work together to determine how they will collaborate and in which area and which sphere. What are the goals, what are the objectives? So a project has to fit with that overall country partnership framework. So I'll now quickly run through each of those 6 steps, which will give you an insight into how a government can work with the bank to access a facility. The first stage is identification of a potential project. The projects are identified that support the strategies within that document and are financially, economically, socially, and environmentally sound. Effectively, at the World Bank, we have a number of criteria on what we lend to and how we lend with governments. And we focus very clearly on finance, economy, social standards, and the environment. Bank teams work very collaboratively with the government of each country to identify projects that can be funded as part of the agreed development goals and objectives. Our primary point of contact in the country will be with the Ministry of Finance, who are our client. As such, if we're doing an agricultural project, obviously we have agricultural specialists at the World Bank who liaise with the Ministries of Agriculture. However, our client will always be, or will generally be, the Ministry of Finance. As such, an agricultural project will have involvement of the Ministry of Agriculture, but will be within that remit of working through the Ministry of Finance. We look to see what the project might be, what will be involved with that project, and what the development objectives will be. Thinking, what will be the impact of this project? Our goal is only to finance projects where the objectives are clear and understood and move forward the development agenda. Once a project has been identified between the government and the bank team will prepare a project concept note, which is an internal document which we use internally to get approval to move forward, looking at the objectives, the risks, and the timetables for such a project. The next stage is assessment and preparation. This work is undertaken by each country government, the borrower, the client, and the client will conduct the studies and prepare the final project documentation and drive the process forward. As such, this is traditionally how a bank operates. A borrower comes to the bank with a business plan, and the bank works with them to determine whether they can lend to it. So in some respects, it's exactly the same as what happens in your private sectors. So in this environment, the slight difference would be that the World Bank will provide significant policy and project advice to the client team as they put those documents together. And at this part, we'll also look at standards, safeguards, environmental issues to identify in advance what might be triggered and what we need to do to offset those concerns. The appraisal stage is the third stage of the process, and this is where the World Bank, taking the documents provided by the client, the borrower, the national government, will assess the economic, technical, institutional, financial, environmental, and social aspects of the project. It's not easy to borrow from the World Bank because we have a whole series of steps that need to be gone through, But the attraction is we ensure that the project is well designed, we work with the client to ensure that social standards are met, that communities aren't adversely impacted, or where they will be impacted, it is in such a way that they will be, they will be compensated for such impact. The goal is to make sure that these are beneficial projects that don't override local communities, cause issues, damage the environment, but are actually implemented in a sustainable and appropriate manner. This is important both for the borrower as well as the bank. Bank staff review the work done during the identification and assessment and preparation stages, and the project appraisal document that comes out of this will also be done in parallel to the draft legal documents. As with any other banking client relationship, the bank and the borrower have a series of negotiations to agree on the loan and credit arrangements, and we also at the World Bank need to take our loan documentation for approval to the Board of Executives. As a multilateral institution, obviously our investors sit on our board, on our representatives, and need to actually approve all of our loans that go to client countries. And the borrowing government also needs to review the loan documentation very clearly and also process that through whatever their national regulatory bodies should be. This could be a Council of Ministers or the country's national legislature. Following approval by both parties to the documentation, obviously both parties sign the loan agreement, and then we are ready to disperse the funds to the client government. During the implementation stage, implementation is always done by the borrower, and it's the client country, your governments, that will implement those loans. The bank, however, will work to just monitor the loan and supervise the loan and to provide support where necessary. Effectively, we have in every country office a financial management team that will monitor the loan, ensure it's being used as per the terms and conditions to ensure that no problems arise. Following the completion of every project, a completion report is prepared that looks at what was achieved, how things went, and also to take lessons for future projects on what went well and what could have been done better. The goal of this is to have a continual learning cycle. So just to reiterate the key points here, that if a country has an agricultural or coffee sector project that they wish to move forward, they need to come to the World Bank to discuss that. And primarily the relationship with the World Bank will be the Ministry of Agriculture having a relationship with the World Bank agricultural person on the ground, and of course going through the Ministry of Finance when moving those negotiations forward. The final part of my presentation, which I'm sure I've overrun, and so apologies for that, will be to mention the document that we mentioned earlier on. Over the last 2 years, and following a request from the ICO members, I have worked with the ICO to put together a compendium of case studies examining risk and finance globally. The document's being published and is being handed out today, and I really do hope that everyone gets a chance to scan through it and see if there are any lessons in there that can be taken home and utilised in your environments. Also importantly, and this is a big request here, it would be fantastic if, when the emails come out from the ICO to yourselves with the link for those reports, that you share that as proactively as you can with your private sectors, your public sector people working in the coffee sector, with NGOs. The idea being is there is a lot of technical information in there which I think people can take ideas from about how to improve risk and finance in your coffee sectors. And it would be a shame not to have the opportunity for people to utilise those reports by not being made aware of it. If you could therefore share that report as proactively as possible, that would be fantastic. And going forward, the World Bank and the ICO will be working on hosting a series of webinars, online events, where the protagonists from each of the case studies will come in and talk about their experiences and share their technical know-how and information with anyone who wishes to log on and attend those webinars, therefore being another great way of disseminating that material to as wide an audience as possible. So at that point I'll say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present, and thank you.